All right, for more on this, let's now speak to Irũngũ Houghton, Amnesty International Kenya's Executive Director. Irũngũ, it's a great pleasure. Welcome to SA Today. So let's first talk about what actually sparked the recent protests in Kenya in full support of Palestine, and just how widespread were they?
Protest action is scheduled to take place tomorrow. There have been previous events and marches in solidarity with the people of Palestine. But more, there is a very gathering that has been called by Voices of Palestine and Amnesty International and others. And essentially, we are calling this ahead of the UN General. And we are essentially saying that the side in Gaza has gone on for too long. 65,000 people killed in the last 2 years, 79 people in the last 1 week. And the world is at a critical point where it can either watch the flattening of Gaza and the almost extermination of the Palestinian people, or it can take action more decisively during the upcoming conference on the two-state solution. So often have been the people across the world spoken. Several companies and several governments have come together to essentially declare the two-state solution is the only solution, and a cessation of the bombardment of Gaza has to happen with a matter of urgency.
Absolutely. We do have an unstable line connection to you there, Irũngũ, but we're going to try and proceed with the interview because you are still audible. So these protests actually started en masse in August, right? And they're actually gaining momentum. So how is Kenya's public showing solidarity with Palestine also influencing the country's foreign policy stance? I mean, this, of course, Irũngũ, right at the back of the UN ruling on the genocide in Palestine, as well as the recent move by Portugal, also formally backing the Palestinian statehood. Are we likely also to see more countries also following this pattern, you think?
Look, I think absolutely. I mean, I think there is a critical moment in terms of diplomatic pressure. We've seen a number of governments across the believe in the two-state solution. They want an end to the bombardment. They want an opening up of the humanitarian corridors, and that has been replicated hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the world. This week we saw the UN Commission, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry, find that Israel has committed 4 out of 5 conditions for committing genocide. And I think it's important that Kenya, as a leading African nation, continues to vote with its conscience, as it did a few days ago in the UN General Assembly, where they voted for an end to the violence in Gaza. So I'm looking forward to seeing Kenya continue to maintain that position and to raise its voice for the two-state solution as the diplomatic pressure continues to isolate Israel, United States of America on this question.
Absolutely, Irũngũ. I mean, in what ways then are protests like these, specifically in Kenya, also reflecting the broader African or even global attitudes towards the Israel-Palestine conflict?
I mean, I think, all people across the world, include particularly Africans who know what it's like. Many people still remember the settler colonial state in South Africa, but in Kenya, for example, and we know that built on privilege, racial power is, it is unequal and it is unacceptable. And therefore, I think we have been horrified by the live streaming of the violence that we've seen in Gaza. And I do think this, live streaming that we've seen on all our devices is not just horrifying, but it is quite unique in the sense that we did not have this in the case of Rwanda, but we do have this now in the case of Gaza. It is important to recognize that, of course, Gaza is not the only conflict that is preoccupying us. We're concerned about Sudan. We're concerned about the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I think at this moment, all eyes have to be on Gaza as the world begins to head to the United Nations and the conference begins to focus on how do we stop the violence, how do we reassert the two-state solution. Palestine must have a state and a nation. Israel must have state and a nation. And I think it's important that at this point, as many people as possible read the report that was released yesterday by Amnesty International, pulling the plug, where we very particularly documented how 15 companies who are responsible for military intelligence and surveillance technology to the Israeli Defense Forces, how those companies have made billions of dollars of this conflict. As we would say very politely, there are certain companies, transnational companies, that are making a killing in Gaza, and it has to stop.
You know, I'm wondering, Irũngũ, how, do Kenyan authorities and even civil society groups also view the current protests? I mean, because we saw what happened with the SARS protests in the country. And what impact could they then likely have on Kenya's diplomatic relations, you think?
I think citizens and civic organizations have a responsibility to assert concerns around we have the liberty and freedom under our constitutions and our laws to speak freely. We must exercise international human rights to be able to put our governments to do what is necessary to keep people safe, to keep people dignified in another part of the world. And I have no doubt that the Kenyan delegation will know that as it moves to New York and to Geneva and to other places in the world where these diplomatic debates are taking place, Kenyans want an end to the violence. They know that Kenyans want the two-state solution, and they want the Kenyan government essentially to lead that process and not provide, inconsistent voting on the question of Palestine. So I think it is important that to create that pressure, we must not exempt governments from their duty to protect. Ultimately, it is not citizens nor NGOs who have the responsibility to protect the people of Palestine. It is governments and the international community under the multilateral institutions. Our role is essentially to wake those institutions up to ensure that they act with a moral sense of urgency and a conviction and a conscience that embedded in international human rights law. That is our responsibility, and that work that Amnesty International and other human rights organizations will be preoccupied, not just tomorrow, but in the coming weeks.
And it's absolutely about time. Irũngũ, unfortunately, our line was very unstable, but I'm glad we got through some of the most important points of our discussion. We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your engagement there. Of course, Irũngũ calling for more diplomatic pressure there. Irũngũ Houghton is Amnesty International Kenya's executive director, as protests in the area there, in the country of Kenya, supporting Palestine have erupted.